Flashing police lights bouncing off my mother's crystal glasses turned out to be the ultimate Christmas gift, easily making up for the dry turkey and cheap wine. People love to quote cliches about family loyalty, but my own flesh and blood traded my future for a cool 300 grand. This is the story of how I hand-delivered their karma. It started on a Tuesday in October, a mundane, aggressively average Tuesday. I was sitting at my kitchen island, eating cold leftover pad thai straight from the carton, scrolling through my emails. Ping! A notification from my credit monitoring app. Usually it was just a slight fluctuation. 2 points up for paying off a credit card, 1 point down, because the wind blew out of the east. I almost swiped it away. I wish I had. Ignorance is warm, for a little while anyway. I tapped the screen. The app loaded, the little blue circle spinning for a second before the dashboard appeared. My score, which I had painstakingly babied to a pristine 780 over the last 6 years of my adult life, was 510. I stopped chewing. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of my stomach. Delinquent account. Overdue balance. $28,450. Total principal. $300,000. I blinked. I wiped my phone screen on my sweatpants, convinced it was a glitch, an app error, a decimal point in the wrong place. I clicked into the details. It was a commercial business loan tied to a property equity line. The lender was Oakmont Financial, a mid-sized regional bank I had never set foot in. The origination date was 14 months ago. 14 months. I dialed the bank's fraud department. The hold music was a tinny, compressed jazz track that looped every 20 seconds. My leg bounced. I chewed the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Finally, a customer service rep named Greg picked up. "I need to report identity theft," I said. My voice sounded thin, far away. Greg went through the script. Name, social security number, date of birth. He pulled up the file. "Ma'am, I'm looking at the origination documents here. This loan was signed in person. Notarized. And you've been making the minimum payments for a year. The delinquency only started 60 days ago." "I haven't made a single payment," I snapped. "I don't even know where your bank is. Are you affiliated with R&B Hospitality LLC?" The air was sucked out of my kitchen. R&B, Richard and Barbara. My parents. 2 years ago, my father decided he was tired of being a mid-level insurance adjuster. He wanted to be a real estate mogul. He and my mother bought a dilapidated motel on the edge of town, convinced they were going to flip it into a trendy boutique bed and breakfast. They talked about it incessantly. The bespoke linens, the artisanal soap. They never talked about how they funded it, and I never asked. We weren't that close. They always preferred my older brother David, who was currently on his 3rd sabbatical in Europe, financed by their remortgaged house. I was just the quiet daughter who moved out at 18, became an accountant, and paid her own bills. I was safe, reliable, boring. Or so I thought. "Ma'am?" Greg's voice cut through the ringing in my ears. "Are you familiar with the LLC?" "Send me the documents," I whispered. "Every single piece of paper with my name on it. Now." They arrived via secure email 10 minutes later. I opened the PDF. There it was. A personal guarantee for a $300,000 commercial loan collateralized against my parents' primary residence, but leaning entirely on my income history and credit score to secure the rate. And there, on the bottom line, was my signature. It looked incredibly close to mine. The swoop of the C, the sharp angle of the H, but it lacked the fluidity of muscle memory. It was drawn, not written. Next to it was a notary stamp, Patricia Higgins, Patty, my mother's best friend. They played canasta every Thursday night. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the quiet of my apartment, the pad thai completely forgotten. They hadn't just stolen my credit. They had sat at a dining room table, probably drinking Chardonnay, and meticulously practiced stealing my life. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I drove to Oakmont Financial in person. I walked into the branch manager's office with a binder I had assembled overnight. Inside were my W-2s, my actual bank statements, a timeline of my whereabouts on the date the loan was signed, and an affidavit I had sworn and notarized at a UPS store at 8 a.m. stating I had never signed the guarantee. The manager, a balding man named Mr. Henderson, looked at the papers, then at me. His face was a mask of corporate sympathy. "Miss Davis, this is a very serious allegation. You are accusing your parents of a felony." "I'm not accusing them," I said, my voice dead flat. "I'm stating a fact. Look at the date." I pointed to the origination paperwork. August 14th. I was in Chicago for a tax conference. Here is my flight itinerary. Here is my hotel receipt. Here is a time-stamped photograph of me standing in front of the bean. I physically could not have been in your branch to sign this. Henderson adjusted his glasses. The document was notarized off-site. Your parents brought it in fully executed. Given your mother's long-standing relationship with our bank and the notary stamp, we processed it. You processed a forged document, I corrected him. And now they are defaulting, and you are destroying my credit. We will have to launch an internal investigation. However, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. These familial disputes are often messy. Usually, the family works out a payment plan internally. If we push this to the fraud department, and they find criminality, your parents will face severe legal consequences. He was testing me, seeing if I would back down to protect mommy and daddy. "Mr. Henderson," I said, locking eyes with him, "I don't care if they get life in prison. Get this off my credit report." I left the bank and drove straight to the police precinct. It was a brutalist concrete building that smelled faintly of floor wax and stale sweat. I sat in a hard plastic chair for 3 hours before a detective finally called me back to his desk. Detective Miller looked like he hadn't slept since 2018. His desk was buried under manila folders. I laid the binder on his desk. I explained the situation. The loan, the forgery, the notary, the timeline. He listened, taking slow notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sighed. It was a heavy, exhausted sound. "Listen, Chloe, I believe you. The timeline proves you weren't there. But forgery cases, especially within families, are a nightmare to prosecute without a confession. They'll say you gave them verbal authorization. They'll say the notary witnessed it via a video call, which is legally sketchy but muddies the waters for a jury. They'll drag it out, claim you knew all along, and only cried fraud when the payment stopped." "So what?" I asked, my hands balling into fists. "They just get away with it?" "I didn't say that." Miller leaned back, tapping his pen. "I'm saying we need a nail in the coffin, a text message where they admit it, an email, an audio recording. In this state, it's one-party consent for recording conversations. If you can get them to admit they forged the document without your knowledge, I can arrest them. Without it, it's your word against your parents and a licensed notary." I left the station and sat in my car in the parking lot. The steering wheel was hot under my hands. My phone buzzed in my cup holder. It was a text from my mother. "Hi, sweetie. Getting a head start on Christmas planning. Are you coming to our house this year? David is flying back from Spain. Let me know if you want me to make your favorite pecan pie. Love you. XOXO." I stared at the screen. The sheer audacity, the absolute sociopathic disconnect between the woman sending kisses emojis and the woman who had forged my name to steal $250,000. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to text back a picture of the loan documents and tell her to rot. Instead, I took a deep breath. The anger in my chest crystallized, turning from a hot, chaotic fire into something cold, sharp, and very precise. "Sounds great, Mom," I typed back. "Can't wait to see you guys." November was an exercise in psychological endurance. I kept up appearances. I went to Sunday dinners. I listened to my father brag about the motel, which was bleeding money and completely devoid of guests, while I chewed tough roast beef and smiled. I listened to my mother complain about the price of organic vegetables, knowing she was 2 months behind on a loan in my name. Every time I looked at them, I saw strangers. Actually, worse than strangers, predators. I bought a discreet digital voice recorder from an electronics store. It was the size of a thumb drive. I kept it in my purse, waiting for the right moment. But my parents were careful. They never brought up money around me. Why would they? As far as they knew, their little secret was perfectly safe in the dark. I needed a catalyst. 2 weeks before Christmas, Oakmont Financial sent a formal demand letter via certified mail. I got one at my apartment. I knew they would get one at their house. I timed my visit for a Saturday afternoon, right after the mail carrier usually arrived. I parked down the street and waited. When I saw the mail truck pull away, I walked up the driveway and let myself in through the side door. I found them in the kitchen. My father was holding the thick, off-white envelope from the bank. His face was the color of old oatmeal. My mother was standing at the counter, a half-chopped onion forgotten on the cutting board. "What are we going to do, Richard?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "They're calling the whole note due. We don't have $30,000 to catch up. We don't even have $3,000. "Keep your voice down," my father snapped. "I'll call Greg on Monday. We can restructure." "We can't restructure. It's maxed out. And if they go after her..." "They won't go after her, Barbara. They'll foreclose on the motel first." I hit the record button in my pocket. I stepped heavily on the creaky floorboard in the hallway, announcing my presence before I walked into the kitchen. My father hastily shoved the envelope behind the toaster. My mother practically jumped, plastering a manic smile on her face. "Chloe, honey, I didn't hear you come in." "Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad." I leaned against the doorframe, projecting casual indifference. "Everything okay? You guys look stressed." "Just small business headaches," my father said, adjusting his collar. "The supply chain issues are really doing a number on the motel renovations." I nodded slowly. "Right, the motel." I walked over to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and turned back to them. I decided to pull the pin. "Actually, it's weird I ran into you guys talking about money," I said, keeping my tone light. "I'm looking to buy a house in the spring. I went to pre-qualify for a mortgage yesterday." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The refrigerator hummed. My mother's eyes went wide, flicking to my father in pure, unadulterated panic. A house?" My father choked out. That's a big step, Chloe." "Yeah." But the weirdest thing happened. I unscrewed the cap of the water bottle. The loan officer pulled my credit. It tanked. Apparently, I have a $300,000 commercial loan in default from Oakmont Financial. My mother let out a small, strangled squeak. She leaned heavily against the counter, clutching her chest. That's impossible," my father said. His voice lacked its usual booming authority. It sounded hollow. "I know, right?" I took a sip of water. I told them it was a mistake. They sent me the paperwork. My signature is on it, and Patty notarized it. I watched them scramble. It was like watching rats trapped in a bucket. "Chloe, honey," my mother started, her voice shaking. There must be a mix-up at the bank. You know how these computers are." "I told the bank it was identity theft," I continued, ignoring her. "I filed a police report." "You what?" my father practically roared, stepping toward me. The facade shattered instantly. "You went to the police?" "Of course I did," I said, my voice dropping its friendly cadence, turning to ice. "Someone stole my identity and forged my signature on a massive loan. What else was I supposed to do?" "Chloe, you have to call them back," my mother shrieked. "You have to tell them you made a mistake. Drop the report." "Why would I do that, Mom?" "Because." She looked at my father, helpless. My father rubbed his hands over his face, realizing they were cornered. He let out a long breath, trying to pivot back to his reasonable patriarch persona. "Chloe, sit down," he said softly. I didn't move. "I'll stand." He sighed. "We didn't mean for this to happen. The motel, the costs spiraled out of control. We needed the capital to finish the roof, or the county was going to condemn the building. The bank wouldn't lend to us anymore. We were over-leveraged. So you used my credit," I said. It wasn't a question. "We were going to pay it back," my mother cried, tears finally spilling over. "We just needed a bridge loan. 6 months, tops. The business plan was solid. But then the contractors screwed us over. We didn't want to worry you. We knew you wouldn't understand. You forged my name, Dad. You had Patty stamp it. That's a felony. It's family! He barked, his temper flaring again. We raised you! We paid for your college! You think you wouldn't owe us a favor? We just borrowed your good standing for a minute. If you go to the police and point fingers, you'll ruin us over some paperwork. You ruined me over some paperwork, I shot back. I'm on the hook for $250,000. We will handle it, my father insisted. Just call the detective. Tell him you remembered signing it. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. I'll get an extension from Greg at the bank. We'll sell the motel, take a loss, and pay off the note. Just give us time. You admit it then, I said quietly. You and Mom signed my name, not me. Yes, my mother sobbed, reaching out for my hand. I stepped back. Yes, Chloe, we did it. We're sorry. We were desperate. Please, baby. Please don't send your own parents to jail. I reached into my pocket. My thumb brushed against the cold plastic of the voice recorder. The little red light was solid. I'll think about it, I said. I turned and walked out of the house. I didn't look back, not even when my mother called my name from the porch. I got into my car, locked the doors, and plugged the recorder into my laptop. I listened to the playback. Every word was crystal clear. The desperation, the admission, the absolute guilt. I drove straight back to the precinct. Detective Miller was eating a sad-looking sandwich at his desk. I dropped the thumb drive next to his paper plate. I got it, I said. He plugged it into his computer, put on a pair of heavy headphones, and listened. I watched his face. For the first time since I met him, the exhaustion faded, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a cop who just got handed an open and shut case. He took off the headphones. Well, that's a confession. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery. We'll bring in the notary, Patty, too. She'll flip on them in 5 minutes to save her own license. When do you arrest them? I asked. Miller checked his calendar. It takes a few days to get the warrants drafted and signed by a judge. Next week is tight with the holidays. I can have units pick them up on the 23rd, or we can wait until after New Year's. I looked at the calendar on his wall. December 25th was circled in red. They invited me to Christmas dinner, I said slowly. My brother is flying in from Europe. The whole family will be there. A big, happy reunion. Miller raised an eyebrow. You want us to hit the house on Christmas Day? No, I said, a dark, cold satisfaction blooming in my chest. I want you to wait until we're sitting down for dinner. I want the turkey on the table. Miller looked at me for a long moment. He didn't judge. He just nodded. Warrants are valid anytime. I'll schedule the execution for 4 p.m. on the 25th. The week leading up to Christmas was an exercise in dissociation. I went to work. I bought groceries. I wrapped a generic, mid-priced watch for my brother and a set of engraved wine glasses for my parents. I wrote Love Chloe on the tags with a gold Sharpie. It felt like assembling props for a play I was about to cancel. Oakmont Financial called me twice. I let it go to voicemail both times. Detective Miller called me once, on the 23rd, to confirm the warrants were signed by a judge. Patty flipped, Miller said. His voice sounded like gravel chewing on dry leaves. Took less than 10 minutes. She said your mother brought the document to her house, already signed, and claimed you were waiting out in the car with a migraine. Patty stamped it as a favor. She's looking at accessory charges, but she gave us a sworn statement against your folks. Good, I said. We're on for 4 p.m. on the 25th, Miller confirmed. I'll have 2 squad cars parked down the block by 3:45. Are you sure you want to be in the room? I wouldn't miss it. Christmas Day arrived gray and bitter. The sky was the color of a dirty nickel, spitting a mixture of freezing rain and sleet against my windshield as I drove to my parents' house. The heater in my sedan struggled to keep up. I was shivering, though I couldn't tell if it was the cold or the adrenaline. I pulled into the driveway at 1 p.m. The house looked exactly as it always did. A wreath on the door, fake icicle lights strung along the gutters, my father's meticulously leased SUV parked out front. It was a picture-perfect suburban illusion, financed entirely by fraud. I took a deep breath, grabbed the gift bags from the passenger seat, and walked to the front door. I didn't even have to knock. The door swung open, and my brother David stood there, holding a half-empty bottle of imported lager. He looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago, just with a slightly more pretentious beard and a tan he definitely didn't get in Ohio in December. "Chloe," he grinned, wrapping his free arm around my shoulders for a clumsy, one-sided hug. He smelled like expensive cologne and stale plain air. "Look at you, still driving that old Toyota?" "Hey, David, welcome back from—" Where was it this time? "Ibiza?" "Majorca," he corrected smoothly, taking one of the gift bags from my hand. "Just doing some freelance photography, connecting with the earth, taking a break from the corporate grind." He had never had a corporate job in his life. I stepped into the foyer. The house was stiflingly warm. The smell of roasting turkey and pine needles was so thick, it was almost cloying. My mother emerged from the kitchen. She was wearing a red cashmere sweater I knew for a fact cost $400. When she saw me, she froze for a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted to my face, searching for a sign. A micro-expression of absolute terror flickered across her features before she buried it under a suffocating layer of maternal cheer. "Chloe, you made it!" She rushed forward, pulling me into a tight embrace. She squeezed me harder than she ever had, her fingers digging into my shoulder blades. She lowered her voice to a frantic whisper against my ear. Thank you for coming." She thought I was surrendering. She thought my presence was a white flag. By showing up with presents, I was silently agreeing to join the family conspiracy. I pulled back and offered a tight, closed-mouthed smile. "Merry Christmas, Mom." My father walked out of the den, a scotch glass in his hand. He looked tired. The bags under his eyes were heavy, dark, purple bruises. The bank's demand letter was clearly eating him alive, but he stood a little taller when he saw me. He offered a stiff nod. "Glad you're here, Chloe. Pour you a drink?" "Just water," I said. The next 2 hours were excruciating. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. We sat in the living room while David held court, talking endlessly about the architectural history of Spanish villas. I watched my parents. Every time a car drove past the house, my father's eyes flicked to the front window. Every time my phone buzzed with a group chat notification, my mother flinched. They were bleeding out from the stress, but they were trying desperately to pretend the knife wasn't in their chest. At 2:30 p.m., my mother cornered me in the kitchen. She was slicing a block of sharp cheddar, her hands shaking so badly the knife was chattering against the wooden board. "I made your favorite," she said, her voice overly bright. "Pecan pie. It's cooling on the back porch." "Thanks." I leaned against the counter. She put the knife down and wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Chloe, your father talked to Greg at the bank on Friday. He thinks he can get us a 90-day forbearance. We're listing the motel on the 26th. We're going to fix this. You won't hear another word about it." I looked at the cheese board. "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep, Mom." She swallowed hard. "I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry. But we're family. We protect each other. You'll see. 5 years from now, this will just be a funny story we tell over Thanksgiving." A funny story. The sheer gravity of her delusion was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that forging my identity, risking my freedom, and destroying my financial future was just a minor family spat. A bump in the road. "Is the turkey almost done?" I asked, completely changing the subject. Relief washed over her face, so intense she physically sagged against the counter. Yes it is. We'll eat at 3:45. Can you set the table?" I took the crystal glasses from the cabinet, the heavy, expensive ones she only brought out once a year. I carried them to the dining room, setting them precisely at each place setting. The red and green cloth napkins, the silver cutlery. I checked my watch. 3:15 p.m. 45 minutes. My father walked into the dining room, admiring the table. He took a sip of his scotch. "Looks good. Your mother worked hard on this meal. She's been stressed. We all have. He paused, waiting for me to absolve him. He wanted me to say, "It's okay, Dad. I forgive you." I said nothing. I just smoothed out the crease in the tablecloth. "We appreciate you being reasonable about the business," he added quietly, staring at the ice in his glass. "Some kids, they'd fly off the handle. They wouldn't understand the realities of capital investment." I knew we raised a smart girl. He reached out and awkwardly patted my shoulder. It was the physical equivalent of a bribe, a tiny scrap of paternal approval offered in exchange for $250,000. "Dinner is ready," my mother called from the kitchen. David wandered in, carrying his beer, oblivious to the thick, toxic tension hanging in the air. "Starving. Smells amazing, Mom." We took our seats. The clock in the hallway chimed the quarter hour. 3:45 p.m. My mother brought out the turkey. It was slightly overcooked, the skin dark brown and tight against the meat. My father began carving it. The electric knife buzzed, a harsh, grating sound that vibrated right through my teeth. My phone vibrated in my lap. A text from an unknown number. "In position, Miller." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My heart rate began to climb. It was a slow, steady drumbeat in my ears. "White meat or dark, Chloe?" my father asked, holding up a piece of turkey with the serving fork. "Dark," I said. He placed it on my plate. My mother passed the mashed potatoes. David poured wine into the crystal glasses. It was a cheap Merlot, bought on discount, masquerading in an expensive bottle. The irony wasn't lost on me. We began to eat. The turkey was dry. It turned to sawdust in my mouth. I took a sip of the cheap wine to wash it down. "So, Chloe," David said around a mouthful of stuffing, "Mom mentioned you were looking at buying a house? In this market? Bold move. Interest rates are killer right now." My mother choked on her wine. She coughed violently, grabbing her napkin to cover her mouth. My father froze, his fork halfway to his face. "It's a process," I said smoothly, cutting a piece of turkey. "There have been some unexpected hurdles with my credit check, things I have to sort out." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. The only sound was the clinking of David's silverware. He looked between the three of us, confused by the sudden drop in temperature. "Hurdles?" David asked. "Like what?" My father cleared his throat, his voice tight. "Let's not talk business at the dinner table. It's Christmas." I checked my watch. 3:58 p.m. "Right," I agreed. "Let's just enjoy the meal." 2 minutes stretched into an eternity. My mother couldn't eat. She just stared at her plate, pushing a single green bean around with the tip of her fork. Her breathing was shallow. My father took a long, heavy gulp of wine, emptying his crystal glass. The digital clock on the microwave in the kitchen clicked. 4 p.m. Thump, thump, thump. The knock on the front door was loud. It wasn't the polite, quick rap of a neighbor dropping off cookies. It was heavy, authoritative. It rattled the decorative frosted glass of the front window. My mother jumped in her chair. "Who could that be?" David asked, turning in his seat. "Are we expecting someone?" "I'll get it," my father said. He sounded annoyed, eager for a distraction. He threw his napkin onto the table and pushed his chair back. He walked into the foyer. From my seat at the dining room table, I had a clear view of the front door. My father unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Detective Miller stood on the porch. He was wearing a heavy winter coat over his suit, his badge hanging visibly from a chain around his neck. Behind him, 2 uniformed police officers stood on the steps, their hands resting neutrally near their belts. The red and blue lights from the cruisers parked on the street painted the snow-covered lawn in rapid, strobing flashes. The light cut through the front window, reflecting off my mother's crystal glasses on the table. "Richard Davis?" Detective Miller asked. His voice was loud, carrying clearly into the dining room. My father took a step back, his face going completely slack. The annoyed patriarch vanished, replaced instantly by a terrified, hollowed-out old man. "Yes, can I help you?" "I'm Detective Miller with the Financial Crimes Unit. I have a warrant for your arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and forgery." My mother screamed. It was a short, sharp, guttural sound. She stood up so fast her chair tipped over backward, crashing onto the hardwood floor. "What?" my father stammered, raising his hands defensively. "No, there's a mistake. We're eating dinner. It's Christmas." "Turn around, please, and place your hands behind your back," Miller said, stepping into the foyer. "Wait! You can't do this!" My mother bolted past me, running into the hallway. "Richard, what is happening?" One of the uniformed officers stepped around Miller, walking directly toward my mother. "Barbara Davis, I need you to step back and put your hands behind your back. I have a warrant for your arrest." "No," she shrieked, backing away until she hit the wall. "No, I didn't do anything. It was a family matter. We were paying it back." David stood up, knocking his own chair back. He looked completely bewildered. "Mom? Dad? What the hell is going on? What did you do?" "You have the right to remain silent," Miller began, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. He spun my father around, pressing him lightly against the wall. The metallic click-click of the cuffs ratcheting shut echoed in the house. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Chloe!" my mother screamed. The second officer grabbed her wrist, twisting her arm behind her back. She thrashed against the officer, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. "Chloe, tell them you authorized it. Tell them it's a mistake." I stood up from the table. I walked slowly to the archway dividing the dining room from the foyer. I leaned against the frame, holding my half-empty glass of cheap wine. I looked at my mother. Her eyes were wide, filled with a frantic, animalistic terror. "But I didn't authorize it, Mom," I said quietly. My voice easily cut through the noise of the arrests. "I was in Chicago, remember?" My father froze against the wall. He slowly turned his head to look at me over his shoulder. The realization hit him with physical force. The color drained from his face. "You," he whispered. "You wore a wire? In your own house?" "My house is an apartment 30 miles from here," I replied. "You stole $300,000 from me. Did you really think a dry turkey and a pat on the back would pay off my debt? You vicious little bitch," he spat, his face contorting with rage. "I am your father. I gave you life. And you tried to ruin it," I said flatly. "Consider us even." "Let's go," Miller said, gripping my father's bicep and pulling him toward the door. "David!" my mother cried as the officer marched her toward the front porch. "David, do something! Call a lawyer! Don't let her do this to us!" David was paralyzed. He stood in the dining room, looking from the police to my parents to me. The golden child, completely useless in a crisis that couldn't be solved with an acoustic guitar or a flight to Europe. "Chloe?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What did they do?" "They forged my signature on a commercial loan for their motel," I said, not taking my eyes off my parents as they were let out the front door. The cold winter air rushed into the house, bringing the smell of exhaust and snow. They defaulted. The bank was coming after me. David stared at me, then looked at the empty chairs, the ruined dinner. "You called the cops on Mom and Dad, on Christmas." "No, David, they committed a felony on a Tuesday. The cops just had free time today." I watched through the open door as my mother and father were loaded into the back of separate squad cars. My mother was crying hysterically, her expensive cashmere sweater getting wet with snow. My father was staring straight ahead, defeated. The heavy doors slammed shut. The cruisers pulled away from the curb, the flashing red and blue lights fading down the street, until they disappeared around the corner. Detective Miller lingered on the porch for a moment. He looked at me, gave a slow, single nod of acknowledgement, and walked back to his unmarked car. The house was completely silent, save for the buzzing of the electric carving knife my father had left running on the counter in the kitchen. I walked in, unplugged it, and the house went entirely still. David was still standing in the dining room. He looked lost. What happens now?" "Now," I said, picking up my purse from the counter. "You call a bail bondsman. They'll need about $30,000 in cash to get out until the arraignment. I hope you saved up from your photography gigs." I walked to the front door. "Where are you going?" David asked, following me into the foyer. "Home." I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me, not waiting for his response. The cold air hit my face, biting and sharp, but it felt clean. I walked down the driveway to my old Toyota. I got in, started the engine, and turned the heat up all the way. It took 2 years to untangle the mess they made. My parents were indicted by a grand jury in February. Faced with the audio recording, the timeline, and Patty's sworn testimony, their public defender advised them to take a plea deal. They avoided actual prison time, first time, nonviolent offenders usually do, but they got 5 years of heavily supervised probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and a restitution order that forced them to liquidate the motel at a massive loss and sell the house. David moved to Portland and stopped returning their calls when the money ran out. Oakmont Financial dropped the guarantee from my credit report 3 months after the arrest. I watched my score tick back up to 780 on a random Tuesday in April. I bought a small 2-bedroom house the following spring. I spend my holidays there now, usually alone, sometimes with a few friends. I don't go to Sunday dinners anymore. I don't answer calls from unknown numbers. They say blood is thicker than water, but water keeps you alive. Blood, when it turns toxic, will just slowly poison you from the inside out. Sometimes the only way to survive is to cut off the limb entirely, and I sleep just fine without them. They say family is everything, but sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones most willing to bleed you dry. I traded my parents for my financial freedom and my peace of mind. Honestly, it's the best deal I ever made. If my story resonated with you today, hit the like button. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.